parameter count is no longer the primary proxy for capability. High quality data is the real valuable asset. For the last sort of 6 to 12 months, everyone's been focused on compute, large models, but really it's investing in high quality data. And so from a startup perspective, I think the real trick is finding existing data sources, or more importantly, creating a UI that allows you to collect high quality data from an interaction with a product domain that you think is valuable, that is producing a moat of highly valuable data that you can then use to post-train and fine-tune your model again and get into that feedback loop. That is a path to creating an enormous amount of value, and it does not require you to depend on the large-scale model providers, which I think is such a creative time in entrepreneur land.
So I want to spend a moment just getting your take of just the state of large models today. And maybe you wanted to start with just level setting for the audience of, what was the inflection point that led us to the current state of, the GPT-3, GPT-4 style models, the inflection 2.5 style models, this combination of the transformer architecture and scaled compute.
I think that this revolution has been driven by deep learning. We are still building deep learning models, albeit with a slightly different flavor now, the transformer architecture from 2017. And, we're now turning those into composable units that are essentially going to act like parts of our software development ecosystem. You're just going to turn to your AI and it's going to actually generate code for you. I mean, we're already sort of seeing that with GitHub Copilot, and, we're seeing it like as a member of your team able to take a natural language instruction and just sort of act in unison with you. And I think that people sort of don't quite realize is that these models are not going to be large forever. In the history of all technologies that have been valuable, anything that is significant gets cheaper and easier to use over time. And that curve is sort of double exponential over the last couple of years. It's incredible. I mean, Microsoft AI just released Phi 3, fully open source. It is close to, but not quite at GPT-4 level. It's fully open source. It's 3.8 billion parameters, right? So that's more than 100x smaller in terms of inference compute than basically the absolute frontier of models today. Like I said, it's not quite as good, but it's certainly, as good as or better than GPT 3.5. That's mind-blowing. I mean, that's something that can fit on your laptop or on a phone, in the future. And so we should expect that trajectory to continue. I think open source models are going to be very close behind the closed source proprietary API models, months or maybe even just a year or a year and a half or something. And that's just going to change the whole creation landscape, basically.
That's super interesting. And what enabled this model to be kind of almost equal in performance while also being much smaller?
Well, so for the last couple of years, everybody has been focused on reinforcement learning from human feedback, where in the final stages of training, at the stage of fine-tuning or post-training, as people say, you have a bunch of trained raters or judges that compare two possible responses or completions from a model. And that pairwise comparison provides large-scale feedback for the kinds of behaviors that you want your model to exhibit. Everyone's familiar with that now. But what we've been focused on as soon as that was showing promising signs, so for the last 18, 24 months, is reinforcement learning from AI feedback, where, we really want very smart and capable models to do that pairwise comparison, because obviously we can automate that process and we can produce an even larger number of supervised, fine-tuned labels to give more feedback to the pre-trained model across a wider range of experiences and moments that might be in tension with one another if you only have a small number of samples that come from expensive, highly trained humans. So that was one method, is reinforcement learning from AI feedback. And then the second is generating training data from these models. So sometimes people refer to that as distillation, where you're sort of trying to absorb as much of the best bits of a big, powerful model as possible. And then you're using that to post-train or sort of align your smaller model. And parameter count is no longer the primary proxy for capability. High quality data is the real valuable asset here. in addition to the architectures. So, for the last sort of 6 to 12 months, everyone's been focused on compute. Can I get compute? And obviously that's kind of important, but or large models, but really it's investing in high quality data. And so from a startup perspective, I think the real trick is finding existing data sources or more importantly, creating a UI that allows you to collect high quality data from an interaction with a product domain that you think is valuable, that is producing a moat of highly valuable data that you can then use to post-train and fine-tune your model again and get into that feedback loop. That is a path to creating an enormous amount of value. And it does not require you to depend on the large scale model providers, which I think is a great, that's why it's such a creative time in entrepreneur land.
Yeah, that's super interesting. As a startup, you're competing with incumbents that have access to large sets of data. So I'm curious if you could share anything more about the nuances of opportunities that might exist for startups to get specific types of data that's maybe more valuable than others.